I have one in particular friend who is very smart. She's very smart, but she's kind of a lefty. And she was buying into like the conspiracy theories or whatever. And I just sent her your summary of the preliminary hearing with the overwhelming evidence against Tyler Robinson. And it cut through the bullshit. So thank you for that.
It's been crazy. Like the amount of conspiracy stuff out there is wild. They play this weird game where they say stuff where they'll be like, are you saying that you think it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty? And it's like, no, brother, the trial hasn't happened yet. Literally no one's saying that. The state said this was going to be the easiest probable cause decision of the judge's life. And I think they're right. Like, this is not a tough one. And yet, you just have endless people out there who are like, well, what about the Egyptian planes, Connor? Didn't you know that there were fucking Egyptian planes?
But like that's what I did when my friend was bringing up the more salacious conspiracy theories. What is the probability that Israel via Egyptian proxies flew in Mossad agents to convince Charlie Kirk's team? And by the way, Erica Kirk worked for Jean-Luc Brunel, who was Epstein's associate a decade ago. So really, Erica Kirk is like a deep state Zionist minder to keep Charlie Kirk on the pro-Zionist thing. And then because the person who rigged up Charlie Kirk's mic was also a Zionist TPUSA member, he rigged up a bomb in concert with Mossad intelligence to blow up his neck in front of like a few thousand people on live TV. And it's like, what's the probability of that versus the probability of Tyler Robinson shooting him? And it's like, for me, it's like 99.9999999 to 0.0000001. But people still want to fuck with that 0.0000001.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's just a probability thing. Like, very unlikely claims require a lot of evidence to be taken seriously, and very likely claims require somewhat less evidence. Like, the one that always gets me stuck is that I'll say something like, "Well, he confessed. He said he did it, and in the confession, he said things that line up with the physical evidence." And they're like, "Well, all that's planted." Like, they did the text message.
Why is he confessing?
Well, why is he confessing? But then they're like, well, no, the confessions were fake. Like, they faked those and then they planted the evidence. And it's like, that's just extraordinarily unlikely. It's extraordinarily unlikely. And you have no evidence to suggest that's true. So why would I fuck with a theory that has no evidence?
Bad.
Yeah.
No, that's somebody in my chat said it immediately. It's because of Israel. True, Israel's bad. That's literally it. It's like everything on the internet has to be connected through some way. So because 80% of your brain has been sucked up by the Israel-Gaza conflict, Charlie Kirk was texting about how he was having a fallout with some Zionist backers. As a result, it had to be Israel that killed him. And I think that's We're really dealing with, I think, some level of like delusion and schizophrenia and conspiratorial thinking and all that kind of stuff. But actually, here's an important question for it. How is and how do you think Andrew Wilson and the Crucible crew are faring in this environment where effectively, like, the more popular position is to give into the conspiracy theory thinking? So like Andrew's a popular guy. He's been on JRE a couple of times. He has good metrics, et cetera, but he's still going up against Candace Owens, and Candace Owens is a fucking juggernaut.
Oh yeah. I mean, look, she's a juggernaut, and the people who are making money off this, like the Baron Colemans of the world, this is a dude he's getting like 20K concurrent viewers when he streams to do his investigations on YouTube, right? Like, there's big money on that side, and it's hugely popular. But look, I think the JRE appearance in particular has been very effective. It's moved the needle, and you can tell it's moved the needle because suddenly Candace is like responding to Rachel on X, right? You know what I mean? So like, obviously this got attention, so that's useful.
All right.
And then in terms of like the broader politics of it, and this might segue to our broader conversation. Like, as we gear up for a post-Trump world, there's going to be a fracture on the right, and the right, I don't think the fracture is what the left predicts it's going to be. I think the fracture is going to be the kind of like Tucker Candace conspiracy types versus like people who are trying to get right-wing policy enacted and are more like political realists. in some sense, and that
Yeah.
looks like the fracture. And it's actually important that the political realists win that one. Like if the right becomes the party of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and like basically just like full on like QAnon level thinking, like that's not good for anybody. That's bad across the board. And that's a fight worth fighting at this point.
Well, I kind of wanted to get into the left-wing memes because I think that, that my audience loves the liberal leftist civil war. I do too. I'm sure you do too on some level. But I was also curious.
I called this shit. I called this shit a year ago.
Yeah, but I think we've all been. We definitely have enough energy in order to talk about that shit, even though the liberals will probably hate the way that we talk about it.
Oh yeah, so, I have no credibility in that conversation, but I love it. I love it anyway.
Okay, so let's hit this real quick then. So I view JD Vance through his internet-brained virtue signaling, through his Joe Rogan appearance where he was basically saying like, oh, we mishandled the Epstein files, but blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, he's literally a part of the administration that could make the Epstein files be transparent. He's pretending like, oh, we ruined the comms on that, and we have no power to resolve the scenario. And it's like, no, you're in power right now. You could literally, if Trump actually had your ear, you could tell Trump to get the DOJ to release the files substantially less redacted than they are right now, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess my question is, I feel like JD Vance panders to the conspiratards more versus Rubio, who's the other person who might be tapped on the shoulder for the next presidential nomination. So between the two, who would you pick and why?
Yeah, between those two, I think Rubio's proven to be the much better governor. Like if you're going to say who's going to wield power better, I think Rubio's proven to be the most competent person in the administration by miles. Now, here's the asterisk I'll put on that. So just to answer the question directly, if I was voting tomorrow versus those of those two, it would be Rubio. The asterisk though, and this is for better or worse with Vance, and I'm not sure this is a pro. It's both a plus and a minus. JD Vance is by far the best communicator on the right wing. Like when campaign trail comes, he's gonna murder. He's gonna crush, and he's somebody who very clearly understands the kind of like apprentice vibes of his current job. Like his job, he has a constituency of one. Right now, his job is to make sure his boss is happy, and I wonder how he's going to pivot when we get to like campaign season, because I don't think he's going to do what Kamala did, where she's like, there's no daylight, we're 1-to-1. I think he's going to suss out what he needs to say and do to keep Trump's good graces and to make sure that he gets a pat on the head and a recommendation if he can get it. But I think he is going to pivot during the campaign season to whatever comes next for him. I don't know what that is.
He's done that already with you're saying there's no daylight between Kamala and Biden or whatever. I think he already has done that in reference to the Iran war, number one, and also in reference to the Epstein files. So my frustration is I'm thinking like a principled human being, and I'm thinking like, well, if you truly do think the Iran war is so immoral, and if you do think what is being done in reference to the Epstein files is so immoral, then freak out, like basically implode your job, yell at your boss, scream into the microphone, because it's the moral thing to do. But obviously, like a politician is not going to do that. So, but my frustration with that is that it does seem like in the pursuit of power, he has compromised any, claimed Republican principle from 2 decades ago. And so that's where, for me, he feels like such a chameleon that I trust Rubio more than I trust him.
Yeah. Well, Rubio certainly has the more classic conservative vibe. I do think that one of the tricks, well, tricky bits that we're going to have to deal with as the party moves forward and the right moves forward is that, how do I put this right? The progressives roll up the carpet behind them. And one of the things I've been increasingly aware of is that, like, in all this discourse about like liberalism versus non-liberalism. Liberalism is actually commonly defined as the progressive status quo. So while I'm not in favor of post-liberalism, I am in favor of pre-liberalism. Like there are elements of the progressive status quo that are a problem, and there needs to be energy on the right towards rectifying that. And in some sense, that explains Donald Trump. Not that he's doing this well, but that he's groping in that direction, and people responded to it. They're like, oh, there's some shit that's just wrong about the way that we've organized our society. Like it's fundamentally wrong that we live in a world where anytime you do any policy, there's going to be a disparate impact analysis, and you're going to go to court, and then we're going to see whether or not that policy had some tangential effect on some identifiable group, and if so, whether a judge is going to strike it down. That seems like kind of an idiotic way to run a country. And it seems like that we made some mistakes along the way to get here, and something should be done about that. And
that I kind of want to do the liberal left-wing civil war, because I think that could piss off my audience enough that it could be fun.
Yeah,
but I do want to talk about what you just said, because I think that continues our conversation where you and I were kind of sussing out like what is Americanism, what in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States is actually like established Americanism, and when did we lose our way? And sorry, I need to sneeze. Oh, jeez.
Good damage control. Good damage control.
Yeah. But you and I had that continuing conversation for a couple of months, and where basically we were trying to identify what was American and what wasn't. And we went through some of the founding documents and the Constitution of the United States. And then we also kind of identified historically where I think you kind of identified where you thought America has erred. So I wouldn't mind continuing that conversation as well. But for now, to piss off my audience because it's funny, the news on the left wing, what I could easily find some content related to and then cover, is the fact that there's a CNN poll that says that 30% of Democrats identify as democratic socialist. There is a Hassan Piker has canvassed with Abdul Al-Sayed and some governor, I forget, her name's Zhang, but he canvassed with some governor named Zhang. And it's being used in the public zeitgeist to the point that like mainstream news commentators are saying like, the Democrats are infected with communists. Hassan Piker is their leader. Oh, dude, there was a Fox News segment. Yeah. There was a Fox News segment where they were like, Hassan Piker is their tastemaker and their ideological leader. Now, on one hand, I feel like Hassan Piker is being held up as a villain with which to scapegoat the leftward shift in the Democratic Party. But I also think the liberals are coping because they're trying to pretend that the left-wing shift in the Democratic Party is perfectly manageable, and it's all filled with like sane Scandinavian technocrats and not like lunatic Marxists.
No, first of all,
how do you feel?
I admit to some mixed feelings because, like, as somebody who's definitely voting right in the next election cycle, this is obviously great. Like this is wonderful for my political project. So in that sense, it's a W. But I want communists to lose at everything. I want communists to lose at checkers. Like I want them to play Go Fish and get defeated by their children. You know what I'm saying? Like I want them to lose at everything they attempt to do in life always. So I'm supportive of people like Wick and people who have been more willing to call this out, and I hope that they win. That said, they created this monster. They did it on purpose. They took off all the guardrails. They took off all the guardrails on their political philosophy. They took off all the guardrails on how they view American republicanism and the proper role of the voting person within a republic with representative democracy. They took off all the guardrails, and all they were left with is what's politically effective versus what's not politically effective. And you saw this in their discourse. They'd be like, oh, I'm not saying I hate socialism or that socialism's evil. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say it's not where the voter is. It's not politically effective. Well, now as it's becoming politically effective, you're going to run into a problem that you don't have any limiting principles left, and that's the box they put themselves in. So I don't think they're going to win. I think they might lose more slowly, but I don't think they're going to win this fight.
What's interesting to me though, because obviously I was a part of the anti-Trump coalition, and I took a lot of flack for saying like, oh, well, you're willing to work with these far lefty freaks in order to try to beat Trump. Isn't that you compromising your principles? But the same thing that motivated me, I think, motivated the liberals in order to cast as broad of a net or build as large of a tent as possible, is the fact that, at least in my opinion, and in the opinion of, I would say, 99% of my audience, January 6, 2021 and the Eastman memo was a legitimate attempt by Donald Trump to subvert the process of, the peaceful transfer of power, and was probably like the closest. It's one of the most fucked up things to happen since like the Civil War, in my opinion, in American government. And then not just that, but like the technocratic. Oh, hold on. This is. I kind of have to put a pin in the half of that because I think we legitimately view this differently. You do view the slashing of DOE, the cutbacks to PEPFAR and USAID, and the kind of like the technocratic rollbacks as the administrative state as like a good thing, yeah?
Yeah, that generally pro. There's stuff that I would have preferred be done differently.
So if I was trying to appeal to you, really the only thing I have is January 6, 2021.
Yeah, which is why I didn't vote for him. But and I agree that was a red line for me in terms of my own voting practices. But what like a year ago today, it was funny because I'm going to talk to Wick tonight about this. And part of the reason I put out a video on it is that like in August last year, I didn't have a channel and I was still doing the centrist thing, right? And I was just channel hopping and jumping on panels. And there was this article that it was an opinion piece in the Times I just lost my shit about, just like went on a tirade. And it was like, in order to restore democracy, we need to abolish the Electoral College. We need to bring in Puerto Rico. We need to bring in DC estates. We need to pack the court. We need to do like all this stuff, like core DSA, progressive reformer messaging. And I was like, holy shit, the left is spending all their time pointing at Trump and saying, we hate that guy, so that they can avoid having to say who they are and what they stand for. Meanwhile, they're coalescing around these really, really dangerous and bad ideas. And this is a problem. Like, if this is what the left is, I think my exact quote is, my heel turn is incoming. This is what's going to happen next. And I intuited this is exactly who the left is, and it turns out to be exactly who the left are. So this is, in many senses, why I was like, if I'm going to start a political project, it has to be on the right, because I don't think there's fertile ground for it on the left. I think they fucking hate my ideas, and they hate the things I think about and the things I want to talk about. And they've done exactly what I predicted they were going to do, and they are pushing this wing within the left for the abolition of the core structures of republicanism within the government. And I'm not talking about like minority figures. I'm talking about Kamala Harris and like leading Democratic politicians. And they're doing it for your own good. Oh, Connor. Oh, honey, we're doing it for you.
No,
we're doing it for you,
legitimately. Maybe I'm too nice. Maybe this is why I'm still stuck in the proverbial centrist niche that I am. But like, I see Josiah from Pondering Politics as like a legitimately good guy. I see Pisco as an earnest person, despite having what I see as politics that are useful to people that I abhor. And so, and they're also relatively sensible people who can carry on a conversation. And so as a result, like I maintain those relationships. But I do see them less nefariously, I guess, than the way that you perhaps see them. But I've heard this coming out of Josiah's mouth, and I consider Josiah like a pretty normal lib guy, but he's like, yeah, it's time. If we can get rid of the Electoral College, let's get rid of the Electoral College. The way that the Republicans are gerrymandering right now, we're going to have to pack the court. You know, the time is now. Like, stop being a pussy. Let's just fucking jam all this shit through. It's time to nuke the filibuster, blah, 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 blah. And they do basically list a bunch of removals of guardrails within the Republic of the United States that, weirdly enough, I think would make the left-wing takeover of the Democratic Party, which, by the way, we should talk about that a little bit more in detail. But it would make it substantially worse. Because they think they're going to get to wield the ring of power in the Lord of the Rings scenario for their ends, but they're not recognizing that 30% of their party has been corrupted by people who I deem as pretty nefarious.
Well, here's the decoder ring for your chat. Our founders' greatest fear was direct populist democracy. The entire structure of our federal government was attempts to prevent the tyranny of the majority through direct democracy. Everything about the federal government is a check on that one thing, because they looked historically at direct democracies and they crash and burn. They don't function. It is not a functional form of national government. You have to have representative government. You have to have checks on direct democracy. Everything that the kind of like DSA progressive playbook is about removing all of those checks so that they can engage in tyranny through direct democracy. That is
they don't think it's tyranny, because basically
it's tyranny. Like,
you have to understand, Ryan, we're right because we represent the people,
good people,
and the people want this. And this is good for the people. And I'm pretty sure I actually heard Josiah. And once again, I like Josiah a lot. But I'm pretty sure in a video the other day, he was like, we don't even need a bicameral legislature. Why do we have the Senate?
Of course.
And I was just thinking to myself, it's like, listen, bro, like, what are the chances that you're going to ban the Senate? You know, like, it's zero. So all you're doing is you're articulating like a pro demos sentiment that is upsetting to me.
No, what they're advocating for is an anti-American sentiment. Like, American government was founded on the idea of representative democracy, and that we were going to have a balance of interests in the federal government. The people represented by the House, the states represented in the Senate and the Electoral College. It was every piece of the federal government is designed to check direct democracy. Even the rights, like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, those are checks on the power of against direct democracy. The whole thing is about this. But here's my point about all this. If the things they want to do aren't tyrannical, then surely they wouldn't sound tyrannical if I proposed the right doing them. So let's think about that for a second. Let's say the right broke, and they could do this tomorrow, by the way, because they have the power. They just choose not to. They have the trifecta. They break the filibuster. They pack the court to 20 justices or 15 or whatever number it is. Then they can revisit birthright citizenship and tariffs. And guess what? I think Justice Alex Jones is probably voting for it, just as a heads up. Then they, those islands off between Texas and Mexico that are contested? You know what that looks like to me?
There's some off of California, too, that only have a population of 10.
You know what those look like, Connor? Those look like states. So those get recognized as states, and we have a few Republicans camping out in tents there. They get 2 Senate votes. So now there's an overcomable majority in the Senate that will take generations for the Democrats to even chip away at. Does that sound potentially tyrannical? Because it's literally their policy platform. And if it's so, it's what they're talking about doing in the open is the most tyrannical thing that I've ever heard as a policy proposal. And they say it with a straight face, like it's for your own good. But of course, it's a overt attack on the other side, meant to just keep them out of power.
That is, well, but so the natural transition conversationally, I think, is getting into which is where you get to call me a progressive, I suppose, is where we get into the lines of the administrative and executive state and what the design of this country was versus what it actually is and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I wanted to hit before we transition into that, because I think that gets into our previous conversations, is how I asked this question again, but I want you to explain it a little bit more. How do you feel about the fact that literally in my opinion, a decade ago, democratic socialism was effectively this like niche political idea of Bernie Sanders and AOC, and that's about it, really. And then like a popular internet thing where it's like, oh, we want universal health care and we want this and we want that. Don't mind us when we say positive things about state capitalist China. Don't mind when we say positive things about early 2000s Venezuela. Don't mind us when we say positive things or like some revisionist things about the Soviet Union. But we're just Scandinavian social democrats. And so that has gone from, you know, kind of a niche but internet phenomena to now allegedly, according to that CNN poll, 30% of the Democratic Party. Like, what the fuck do you do with that?
Well, I think this is one of those moments where we should look back and remember all those time that people who were flagging this issue early were called conspiracy theorists, because what they were talking about was a ideological takeover, a long march, if you will, through, in particular, our cultural and educational institutions, which has
yeah,
been,
but aren't you a Nazi for talking about cultural Marxism now?
Yeah, well, that's what you were called. You were called, like, James Lindsay got put on the SPLC's hate watch group for making this point. Now it turns out the SPLC was literally fucking KKK members, so maybe we don't take their word for it anymore. But
see, hold up. Whenever I hear that shit, have you actually dug into that? Because I haven't at all. What was it? Did they have like KKK members that they paid to do speeches for the SPLC, or did they have them like informing for the SPLC and they were paying them a consulting fee? What was the actual thing there? Because there's paying the SPLC, like them doing what Bibi Netanyahu was accused of, where they just pay the KKK millions of dollars a year so they can prop them up as a villain, sounds a little far-fetched to me.
Yeah, so there's two separate buckets there. The one I was making a joke about was it's not the court case, but it was reported in the New York Post that a prominent SPLC member has had like a long-term love affair with a KKK member, which is just funny. Wow. Like that's just very funny.
That's just going to happen sometimes. Listen, we have Destiny and Lauren Southern. Yeah, okay, that's just going to happen.
But the criminal charge is about the core of it is wire fraud, and it's the idea that the SPLC was clandestinely funneling money to various hate groups, several of which were actually on their hate watch list. So like they published to donors like, oh my God, this is the hate we're fighting, but they were actually funneling money to them. And the case is going to be about whether the donors were misled. When it's like, oh, like we thought you were fighting the KKK and we donated money, but it turns out that you were like, you know, they were sending you reimbursement requests for like the crosses and gasoline, and you were like, okay, you know, like that seems like the sort of thing.
I know. I want to know the purpose of it, because like I guess my question would be, so for instance, like this is a Google search, so take it with a grain of salt or whatever. But prosecutors claim the SPLC used donor money to pay informants inside white supremacist and extremist organizations rather than fighting them. The DOJ alleges that between 2014 and 2023, more than $3 million, later updated in superseding indictments to 4.1, went to members of the groups like the KKK and the National Socialist Party of America. The government argues some of the funds were used by recipients for recruitment and purchasing extremist materials, and that donors were never informed the money was used this way. But then my question is, well, I think the Google search might have just said it. The SPLC might have been saying like, well, we need informants so we can understand the organization of these hate groups. But then, you know, what those people do with the money is kind of like, it's up to them, you know, I guess. So,
yeah.
I don't know if you find that defense compelling is what I'm saying.
The question is going to be whether it was, you know, a material misrepresentation when they fundraised and said we're fighting hate groups while providing this money. And I mean, that's a factual question for a jury more than likely. But but
like if we analogize this to law enforcement, sorry, I'm just pressing a little bit. If we analogize this to law enforcement has confidential informants that they compensate. Sure. And sometimes those confidential informants are members of, you know, drug gangs. So by the same logic, could we not just say law enforcement is funding drug gangs by having confidential informants inside criminal organizations?
Sure, but the missing piece doesn't exist. The analogy doesn't work, because the question with the problem with the SPLC, if you take the government's view, is that the SBLC is fundraising. So they are trying to prop up hate groups in order to get more donations. And that's why they're giving this money, is to like, is so that they have a target to fundraise against.
So it's the lack of transparency, I suppose.
It's whether it's a fraudulent misrepresentation that they told people we're fighting hate, please give us money, but in fact they're propping up the hate group, and that's how they're fundraising. It's basically a question of, are you legitimately combating hate through some clandestine informants, or are you in a situation where racism is somewhat in short supply and you are trying to increase the supply because you're an NGO that needs a problem to solve? Sort of that's kind of that's not a legal analysis. That's more of like a big picture analysis. But that's the point. But the reason I brought them up is merely because they put James Lindsay on their hate watch group for claiming things were neo-Marxist, which was very funny.
Which I understand. My frustration
because it turns out that they are neo-Marxists. But yeah, that's
right. That's my frustration with because I was called that in the late 10s, because I was like, oh, have you ever heard of the Frankfurt School? Have you ever heard of postmodern neo-Marxism? Because I was like a huge Jordan Peterson guy. But then, if you actually look at the intellectual heritage from like Gramsci to Marcuse to the people who wrote DEI and CRT, it's a clear line. They cite each other. They literally they go back saying like, I'm citing Marcuse, who in turn was a student of Gramsci, and we're going to use this left-wing analysis to apply to this sociological problem. And it's like, dude, like Gramsci literally said the reason why left-wing revolution was not possible in capitalist societies was because of all these counter-revolutionary forces in culture, law enforcement, the military, and government. And in order for people to be more amenable to a socialist revolution, we need to change the zeitgeist to be more left-wing thinking. And then he had intellectual babies, and his intellectual babies had intellectual grandbabies, and the intellectual grandbabies are the people that we're fighting in our current culture. I don't feel like that's a conspiracy theory if it's descriptively true.
It's not even subtle. Like if you go, I'm a former teacher. Paulo Freire.
They cite each other.
Yeah, I always get his name wrong, but I think it's Freire. It might be Freire, but I think it's Freire. Paulo Freire is like one of the most cited scholars in all of the humanities. I think if you do a Google Scholar, it's like 70 to 100,000 citations to his works. He's a overtly Marxist educator. He's by far the most cited person in all of educational literature. So like the fact that there is a overt Marxist lens that's being taught, especially in teacher training, as someone who went through teacher training, I can both tell you from lived experience and by the fact that you can just do the research yourself, this is true. It's not subtle. And the problem is the left's cultural takeover of these institutions, this kind of long march, if you will, I think is starting to bear fruit. And that's what this 30% is about. It's also why I think people like Wick, while I applaud his fighting the fight, are fundamentally mistaken about what's happening. He views it like, oh, it's early stages. The politicians are just showing up. Let's play whack-a-mole. It's not fucking early stages. By the time the politicians are openly admitting that they have these Marxist leanings, they've already infiltrated. The infiltration happened at a much different level. The political level, as you were saying with Gramsci, is last, not first. We're in the late stages of this infiltration.
That's where I want to talk to you about because this is going to go into like where the welfare state should be and narratives about the early 20th century establishment of the welfare state, and also like whether or not we should be rolling back the American executive state, which you and I have talked about previously. But I think I have a question of justification from a community member. Fashion 40 for 5 says, is this administration not basically heading in the direction of tyranny? And I think he's asking you that because the liberals feel that their big tent politics of incorporating the far left and never Trump Republicans simultaneously, of working with people like AOC and Chevalier and all that kind of stuff, is necessary. And I've heard them say this explicitly. It's necessary because of the political moment we're in, because of the extremity of the Trump administration. So do you not what do you think about the Trump administration and its aggression, does that justify the response from the left? Yes or no, and why?
No, I don't think you get to be a communist because you don't like the other party. I think that's retarded. And quite frankly, has been the obfuscation that's allowed these people to gain a political foothold because nobody's been examining their views. The second that their views got examined, you get the Bill Maher phenomenon, where he's like, he hates Trump. Yeah, he hates Trump, and when Trump's on the ballot, he's voting left. But as he said, his vote's in play in 2028 because even though he's a historic blue voter, and I think likely he will vote blue, regardless of the fact that his vote's in play, he's not voting for a pack of fucking communists. He's just not. And the problem with the left is that they removed the ideological and philosophical limiting principles and guardrails that define Americanism. They removed them consciously and purposefully through political movements in 1900 on. And then they rolled up the carpet behind them. And now they say, well, if you oppose our current political project, you're being illiberal, which might be true. There might be illiberal people who are doing that, but your current political project yourselves is not liberal in the American sense of American classic liberalism. It's actually many generations of progressive nonsense down the road of a detour away from that. So, that's the fundamental disconnect. A lot of the stuff
you and I need to beef about the material conditions and politics of the early 20th century onward, because what I identify as the liberal status quo, I think you're going to identify as progressive nonsense, and we should fight about that momentarily.
Yep. No, for sure. But also, this wasn't.
Well,
this wasn't.
I wanted to say this though because I wanted to have a
a
little moment of Schadenfreude before we do that. So North and I, unfortunately, are beefing right now over the Destiny drama, which I think is silly, but whatever. But we were both saying effectively what Wick, Destiny, and Mooten are saying now, which is like, hey, we think that, Donald Trump is kind of like a political threat to the Republic of the United States. And what he's doing is, shitty, and he's killing people unnecessarily through incompetence and stupidity. And therefore he should be opposed. And effectively the Republican Party should not be modeled after Trump in the future. But, when you go too far left, we are still ultimately Republican in that we believe in America and representative democracy and American militarism, blah, 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 blah. So if you elect fucking communists or socialists, we're going to tell you to go fuck yourself. And we took a bunch of shit from the center left because they were saying, oh, no, you got to vote blue no matter who. It's an emergency. You have to vote blue no matter who. Even if it's a socialist, even if it's a communist, you have to vote for him. And then what's so funny is now that the midterms are barreling down on us, and we see how far the leftward zeitgeist shift is, now Wick, Mooten, and Destiny they're pretending they haven't adopted our position, but they very much have, where they're saying like, we're going to vote blue a majority of the time, depending on consequential analysis. However, if you're too far left, fuck you. And that was refreshing and some Schadenfreude.
So this is the thing, and I appreciate that they're doing that. I'm going to tell Wick I appreciate he's doing it. I appreciate that they're doing it. I wish they had done it earlier. I think other people like yourself, you were doing it earlier. God knows I was doing it a long time ago. But ultimately, they are going to lose this fight. They're going to lose. They might lose slowly, but that's the best case scenario. But they're going to lose. And the reason that they're going to lose is that they don't actually believe that one-to-one direct democracy is a bad idea. And they don't actually believe that socialism is evil. They don't actually hold these principles. They believe that it's inconvenient. And if you talk to someone like Wick, he'll say, like, I believe in individual rights. I believe in liberalism. And then you'll be like, well, why? Like, what's the foundation? What's the reason for that ontologically? Like, it's good. But there isn't an underpinning philosophy to it. And there isn't because the left expunged this philosophy from its worldview over the past 100 years. It's been like an ongoing project, an overt project to get rid of this worldview and replace it with a sort of Rawlsian blank slateism. And that the end result of a Rawlsian blank slateism is a socialist communist party. That's the logical end result of that
the
experiment.
only way that you can explain communism in my mind. So like communism being the end, believing that the end state of a humanity is a moneyless, stateless, classless society. No money, no government, and no hierarchy of social order. Everyone is egalitarian. The only way that you could believe that that is like a just and natural end state of humanity is if egalitarianism was your sole principle.
Exactly.
And you like ignore every other social phenomena. You literally ignore biology, sociology, history, fucking tribalism, human psychology. Like, you have to ignore every other school of thought that's analyzed reality ever. You have to make egalitarianism your god, and then after you make egalitarianism your god, then communism becomes the logical end state of humanity.
And
but you basically have to ignore like 90% of human understanding to get there.
Yeah, well, and this is the great harm of the kind of Rawlsian veil of ignorance argument, where they say like, oh, behind the veil of ignorance, wouldn't you want a society where everyone is treated blah, blah, blah? Wouldn't you, where everyone's equal and egalitarian?
But no, I don't.
Well, but that's the thing. And the reason you don't is because you understand that humans have a nature. And because humans have a nature, you're better off in a society that has traditions and practices that honor and amplify the good parts of human nature and minimize the bad parts of human nature than one that's purely egalitarian, because humans aren't blank slates. We have a nature. And this kind of fight against human nature has become so prevalent in left-wing thinking that I don't think they're going to be able to defeat the far left in the long run. I think that in 20 years, they're all going to be where the DSA is, because
I don't know if it's going to be that bad. So dollars to donuts, let's say that you and I wanted to make like a $30 or $50 bet right now for the year 2050. My prediction is that effectively probably a third to half of the Democratic Party is going to be Democratic Socialist. A lot of their advocacy is going to be social democratic Scandinavian policy, because they're not going to be able to go as far left as they want to. And effectively, it will be the equivalent of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom and Australia. However, that's not to say that American politics isn't going to get infinitely more fucking annoying. And what I mean by that is, like, there will be Democrats who have to pander to these far leftoid freaks. And so you'll see, like, you know, whatever 2040s version of Kamala Harris, she'll like eulogize Mao Zedong as one of the great men of the 20th century. And he's just like a little misunderstood. And the great leap forward was an oopsie doopsie. You know, and you're going to be like, what the fuck was that? And it's going to be because she has to pander to far left freaks.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Let me see how I can work out the problem.
Well, compared to like a completely Marxist takeover of the Democratic Party and a Marxist takeover of the United States, I think that's more likely.
Assume the right does not achieve a McCarthy 2.0 in the intervening period, which would be that would be how this would actually be combated if that happened. Assuming no McCarthy 2.0, I'm trying to figure out what the rate of acceleration would be, because like I remember in like 2016, 2015, when we were doing the gay marriage debate, like the end of the gay marriage debate, people were like, oh my God, the kind of the conspiracy theories on the right. Then if you let this happen, you're going to be seeing, men in women's clothes playing girls' sports in the near future. And it was, and it was like, no, that's crazy. And then that became like a mainstream position within 10 years. We've seen
it's been fought back, but
it's been fought back by the right.
It took a little bit of effort to fight it back.
And then we then in the 2000s we had like, what if we did overt race communism? Like, what if we just did overt, like we just did Marxism, but on the basis of race? What if we did that? And that was actually like really successful for quite a long time. It kind of the eventually Trump's election kind of signaled the end of that temporarily. I don't know that that's going to stop though. If the Dems win in 28, I would assume that they're going to pick up that project again.
Just because I feel like the lack of descriptive, I guess, rigor right there is going to trigger the shit out of people. What I'm going to say is, I think that if you look at the BLM movement, or if you look at some of the rhetoric that was coming out of like, oh, well, you know, black folk in America have disproportionate outcomes, therefore, like, we have to and do XYZ to the police until we have effectively like egalitarian incomes based off of all demographics. The logic in that you're taking the bourgeois proletariat calculus of like, the bourgeois are the haves and the proletarians are the have-nots, and we live in an unjust society until we rectify this material injustice. To me, it feels like the same calculus when it came to the rhetoric that was coming out of BLM and coming out of the defund the police movement. Was there's white supremacists and honorary whites, they're the bourgeois. Then there's the blacks and the people of color, and they're the proletariat. And until we have egalitarian outcomes across these demographic groups, we live in a fundamentally unjust society. And I think when you try to capture that in race communism, correct me if I'm wrong, that's basically the idea you were trying to elicit.
Yeah, but this wasn't even subtle. Like, I mean, Ibram X. Kendi won the MacArthur Genius Grant and became one of the most influential...
my conservative mom read Ibram X. Kendi.
Yeah, he was one of the most influential academics in the country. I think between me and my wife, we got given 3 copies of his books at various HR trainings between 2020 and 2024. And amongst his genius policy proposals that made him the darling of the left, was to amend the Constitution to create a administrative department which would analyze disparities amongst identitarian groups in the population in economics and intervene using the force of the federal government if there was ever more than a 3 to 5% gap between any identifiable groups in the economy. If that's not overtly race communism, I don't know what overt race communism would be. Like the idea that we're gonna be like, oh shit, the Mexicans aren't doing as well this year, let's take money from the other groups and give it to the Mexicans. That's overt race communism. Like what? If you
I might say race socialism, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a distinction without a meaningful difference. Like you're going to violate people's property rights on the basis of this identitarian, equity, bourgeois, revolutionary thought. That's the point.
My question though, and this is where the rubber's gonna meet the road into previous conversations that we've had, is the late 19th and early 20th century, and maybe this is because I was raised by communist teachers, but we were more free from the state. Well, actually, we had more liberty, okay? Because the state was substantially smaller. It didn't take an active role in the lives of everyday Americans. But the way that anarcho-tyranny is kind of a phrase that's used nowadays in order to talk about when the state steps back and basically lets criminals run roughshod over society, the late 19th and early 20th century was kind of projected to me as a narco-tyranny, but that of corporations. So effectively, like, you had labor movements that were working for just working conditions within like and living conditions within the tenement farms and the textile mills and all that kind of crap. And basically, because you didn't have these welfare programs, people could get injured on the job. There was no disability. There was no nothing. Basically, like, you're just like, fuck you. You can't work here anymore. You don't have the physical capacity to. Good luck being fucking poor. And so you would just be cast out of the corporation that you had previously worked for, and you were just fucked. And same thing with the early 20th century, particularly with like the Dust Bowl or the Great Depression, was speculation on Wall Street led to one of the biggest economic booms in American history. But not only was that wealth unevenly divided in substantial ways, but effectively when the market imploded, hundreds of thousands or millions of people were basically just like thrown into the street without a pot to piss in. And so the argument from the New Dealers and the people who support a welfare state was that at that point, that material deprivation of the late 19th and early 20th century was causing people to be radical where they really wanted two ideologies. They either wanted socialism or they wanted fascism. And those were like the two things that people were being radicalized towards. So the narrative from the welfare staters is that this is effectively like a riot tax where we're appeasing the poors by giving them a standard of living that is tolerable at the lower end of society so they don't turn to be fascists or communists. How do you respond to the narrative of the New Dealers in that regard?
There's a bunch of ways you could look at that. One is there's some stuff that you're just not supposed to do. Like there's a reason why the federal government was created to be limited and not to have the power to do these things. And you could do many of these things on a state level if you wanted to, but that in order to actually enact those policies, they had to do tremendous violence to our constitutional order and system. You had constitutional amendments, threatened court packing to reverse long-standing Supreme Court precedent. Like the federal government was not actually designed to be able to do any of these things. So that's the first thing. And there's a reason why it wasn't, and we're starting to see that reason bear fruit all this time later. The second is, some of this stuff, you can look at it and say like, oh, it was useful in what it did back then, but how's it working out now? Like if you're going to complain today about inflation, we invented inflation in order to achieve the ends that you talked about. Inflation is a product of the changes that were wrought to the government during that time period. The national debt is a product of the changes that were wrought to the federal government during that time period.
The counter argument that I want to bring specifically to this subcomponent, and I don't have a problem talking about like we have a onerous, overwhelming, debt-ridden, massive federal state. I'll just concede that instantaneously. However, the reason why the anarchism that is kind of like anarchism isn't the correct word, the libertarian fantasy of the 19th century, the reason why that is not as appealing to me, I suppose, is because like during that history when we had less of a state, we also had inflation, but we had inflation for a different reason. We had inflation because the different states were running different currencies and private currencies weren't regulated. So the way that Bitcoin, the way that Ethereum, the way that these private currencies are kind of like speculated on right now, that was like the history of like the early 19th century where the lack of regulation. Yeah, there were literally people trapped. They were doing financial speculation from state to state, where they were taking state dollars from one state, moving it to another state in order at an exchange rate, and then moving it back when it was profitable and all this kind of bullshit.
Though, that's about the gold standard dollar. But you'd still see runs on banks and things like this, like instability.
Right. So basically, what I'm trying to say is a centralized, onerous, large, debt-ridden government comes with its own challenges, but also removing that onerous state doesn't just like turn America into a utopia.
But here's my, if I'm going to try to boil this down to the simplest possible point. If you can vote to give yourself a raise with my money, if that's a thing that we're going to permit, and then we also permit near universal suffrage, how do you avoid the long-term DSA takeover? Because like if you can instead of creating wealth, if you can just vote to take mine, a lot of people are going to do that. They're going to vote to give themselves a raise, and the original structure of the federal government did not permit that. It just wasn't a thing that was possible. And we willed that into existence over time. And at the same time, we, as a society, removed from our educational system the belief in kind of these core American limiting principles and values, which would be opposed to that sort of thing. And unsurprisingly, we have seen people vote for endless government spending, endless tax cuts, endless attempts to put money in their own pocket at the expense of future generations or at the expense of other people in society, depending on their motivations of the day. And I don't know how we get out of that without putting some of the tools back in the toolbox. I don't think people are going to stop voting that they would rather have other people's money.
There's two things there. I think that the latter thing that I wouldn't mind talking about is like the international fight against fascism and communism, which is part of the part of the way that we created this very large state with the fiat currency. But the first thing that I want to talk about is the labor theory of value, which I understand that like it is a rawly left-wing idea, but I don't want to commit the genetic fallacy of just like, oh, just because it's a left-wing idea means it's incorrect. So the labor theory of value, to be fair, is wildly dumb.
Yeah,
okay, it's very dumb.
Stupid.
Yes, just saying that like I pour endless labor into this thing. I think somebody did like a mud cake analogy where it's like, well, if I spend 8 hours turning dirt into a mud cake, that doesn't mean that the mud cake is good. You know, like that. There's something there with the labor theory of value. However, what the deeper point of the labor theory of value, I suppose, is that labor as a collective force is the energy that creates the productivity within society. Okay, labor is what spins the flywheel or presses the button or does whatever. And so, regardless of whether or not we can track the value accurately, the value, especially you said your money. Let's say that I'm a laborer and I work for Ryan Mulally. Let's say that I manufacture pencils. Okay, like literally all day I'm fucking chopping out graphite and wood. Okay, so without people,
you're not beating the progressive allegations in this conversation.
What's that?
You're not beating the progressive allegations in this conversation. Go ahead.
It's fine because once again, I don't necessarily want to worry about the left-wing, right-wing origin of an idea. I more like want to figure out whether or not it's true. So if there's 1,000 of me making wood and graphite, and we're all at this like we basically live in the apartment complex behind Walmart. We can't afford food. We can't afford our kids. We can barely survive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, you're living in a fucking mansion, down by the lake. You're throwing these soirees. You're having bacchanals. You're buying $10,000 worth of wine per month. Why wouldn't the working class say, hey, the only reason why that guy can throw bacchanals, have a mansion, have private security, have his kids go to the private schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is because of the energy that we put into his institution on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, while we don't want to guillotine him, we do want to tax him at 33% so we can use his wealth to alleviate our own suffering.
Okay. So the point being what? That it's inappropriate for people to work at prevailing market wages?
No. Okay. But the late 19th and the early 20th century, prevailing market wages have market pressures that were ignored by the corporations at the time.
Well, no. For instance, they were ignored by the corporations at the time for the one of the things that I've never criticized, because I think it actually just turned out to be a good and productive. In our previous conversations, we talked about progress towards Americanism versus detours from Americanism. One of the things that was progress towards Americanism is the idea of antitrust. Like that there are in fact, it is possible to have cartels which are anti-competitive, and because they're anti-competitive, they will put pressures on the market that are going to defeat it from functioning correctly. So that sort of thing, I think it turns out, was a good use of.
Look at you, progressive trust buster, Teddy Roosevelt, Republican Ryan Mulally over here.
Everybody, like anybody who follows my channel knows that like Woodrow Wilson is one of my least favorite historical figures. But even a broken clock is right twice a day. Like there is a need to avoid monopolies, because monopolies, and this goes back to Locke. Like Locke's like, yes, the right to property is a natural right that cannot be taken from you. But also, if you're on a desert island and one guy has all the coconuts and you're starving to death, there's probably something that has to be done about that. Like there is a threshold at which monopolies have to be busted in order to allow for, the productivity of human nature. And no, and
you know what's so funny about that? This is the problem with our conversations, is because we actually like try to engage in nuance. Is when somebody hoards the coconuts, which I don't know if Vosh came up with the analogy first or if Locke did, but the point is that Fabian Liberty actually says no, it's just for one person to have 1,000 coconuts and for everybody else to be starving. And if that person individually harvested all the coconuts before all the other survivors showed up on the island, and he wants to keep all the coconuts for himself, then fuck it. That's his property rights. And I'm just like, and for me, like, I understand, like, in a vacuum of moral authority and property rights, you could have that position. But that doesn't stop descriptively what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next is your neighbors are going to deform pikes out of palm fronds, and they're going to stab you to death, and they're going to steal all your fucking coconuts. Well, so regardless of the morality of the situation, we should probably figure out a decent way for everybody to get some fucking coconuts.
This is why it seems like natural rights or natural law theory is oftentimes very similar to the NAP, but they are meaningfully distinct. And this is where I think libertarians get it wrong, is that they ascribe to the NAP this sort of like divine moral principle, when in reality what the NAP is a better than average description of what makes humans flourish and be happy. It's an attempt to describe natural law. It's not perfect, and because of that it's just off in some ways. So like the idea that like people wouldn't spit roast and like sacrifice to the gods the dude holding all the coconuts is insane. Of course they would. But to go back to your point, the problems inherent with having the system that we currently have, where like let's say you have these people who aren't making enough money. Okay. Well, is that because we have like a massive labor surplus, right? Which is going to lead into the immigration conversation. Like why are their wages so low? Are their wages so low because there's an anti-competitive monopoly? That would be another reason why their wages are low. Or is it the fact that their wages are actually the correct wage? And you see this sometimes with like people are like, oh, the CEO of McDonald's makes X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, it turns out that if you took his whole salary and redistributed it to all the cashiers and burger flippers, they'd all get an extra $1.50 a week, because the scale is so huge that him making $10-15 million a year is actually proportionate to the size of the entity that he's managing at that point. So like in a hypothetical, I'm not trying to understand exactly why there's the disparity.
Well, we maybe we should talk about what the state should and shouldn't do. Maybe that would be a simpler way to kind of break through, because we might actually have alignment on that. But then my question is, are you principally opposed to a progressive tax rate? So for instance, like let's say that the McDonald's everybody at McDonald's makes they make 20 grand a year, but they're getting taxed at 10% rate. And let's be real, after like tax refunds and child tax credits and all that kind of shit, they're probably actually receiving tax dollars rather than paying tax dollars.
Yeah.
Then the CEO is getting, if he claims his income as personal income tax, he's getting hit at 37% after the progressive tax rate takes effect. But then once he claims his taxes, his effective tax rate is actually 22% or some shit like that, right? So do you have a problem with that? Because the reason why I'm okay with that is because I think that if a McDonald's worker, who I don't expect to be economically literate, but if they hear that their boss, who's making an absurd amount of cash, is still getting hit at a higher tax rate than them, which is then going into social services that alleviates some of their suffering, they're less likely to fashion spatulas into knives and try to chop his head off. You know what I'm saying?
I think that,
so.
I actually,
are you principally opposed to it?
I'm principally opposed to this being a federal government thing. I think states can handle this how they'd like to handle this, and there's a lot of room for experimentation there. I think doing this at the national level is an error. I think that we were, we had to amend the Constitution to allow for income taxation at all. And when we did it, by the way, it was promised first to be temporary, and then it was promised to be only a tax on the super wealthy. right?
Right.
And and by the way, play that into the current conversation about wealth taxes, where they're like, oh, it'd only be a one-time thing and only on the super wealthy. And you're like, huh.
Oh,
I feel
no.
like historically we've heard this before.
Yeah. And wealth taxes are absurd to me. Taxing something, taxing an asset
is insane.
that it itself cannot produce like additional shit. Like you don't have like a measurable revenue or a measurable profit. It's fucking absurd to me economically. But the leftists, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
Historically, the federal government supported itself through tariffs. Tariffs are not, in modern parlance, tariffs are not good economic policy compared to like alternatives. So like if you look at the EU, while they do have tariffs, what the EU supports itself through, which is like the modern day equivalent of a tariff, is the VAT. And that's a much more
it hits everybody, right?
It hits everybody, but it also it works better in a number of ways than, like, for example, corporate taxes, because the problem with the corporate taxes is that corporations can decide when and how much income they have once they hit a certain scale. So corporate taxes almost, and what's weird about that is that if you're a small business, you can't do that as easily as if you're a big business. Just like federal regulations are a major disincentive for small business and a major boon for big businesses because it chokes out their competition. So a lot of these policies are very bad for innovation, and they're very bad for small business owners, and they're very bad. They are super beneficial, not because they were designed to be this way, but they're super beneficial for very wealthy people and for corporations because they can hire people like me to figure out how to make it very beneficial for you. And because you have money to spend on that, we tend to do a good job.
I remember everybody bitching about Boeing and Lockheed and General Dynamics and all that kind of stuff, paying $0 in federal income tax a few years. Now, of course, the people who work there pay taxes. They pay taxes on the consumer goods that they buy, et cetera, et cetera. But the corporations themselves, basically, because they were in expansion, and this was one of the things about going to business school that actually kind of made me simultaneously skeptical of corporations, but also like, hey, man, you're going to fucking play the game, right? And also I understand the incentive structure. So effectively, if you have a business expense, a justifiable business expense, you can reduce, reduct. I don't know. You can take it off your fucking taxes. But the whole reason why we do that in an American context is so businesses grow and expand. So if you're buying a new factory, if you're buying a new machinery that's expensive as shit, if you're hiring, well, I don't know if hiring new employees would be tax deduced, but the point is like growth. We don't want to tax growth because we want to incentivize American corporations and companies to continue to grow as maximally as possible. Because the truth is, they are paying taxes on the goods that they're purchasing within the American economy. The individual workers there are paying taxes on their income, blah, bitty fucking blah. So anyways, growing companies are good for the American economy.
But then apply that same logic to individuals. We don't want to tax corporations because we want them to be productive. And if we tax them too much, we disincentivize them from being too productive. And then we're going to tax individuals for being productive.
Right. But then like productivity gets weird for me because like I return to not the actual labor theory of value, which is dumb as shit, but more to like we're all human and we put our pants on, one leg at a time. So just as an example, I did get divorced recently, and we did the negotiations. So as a cop, I worked with retail and restaurant employees, and sometimes I would be patrolling Walmart at 2 a.m. while people are like stocking shelves. And the truth is that the Walmart employee was working quite hard to restock the shelves. They were doing an inventory of the line. They were understanding what products were missing. They grabbed the products that were in the back in the warehouse. They went back forward, and then they just stocked shelves for like, 12-hour shift or a 10-hour shift or whatever, right? That is not rewarded particularly well within our financial system. It's necessary labor, but you're only making $10 an hour because of the scales of economy and all that kind of bullshit, right? A lawyer, an often maligned profession, a lawyer was talking to me about my divorce, and he was making $300 a fucking hour, basically babysitting 5 assholes talking shit about the division of their assets. Right now, I'm not saying that motherfucker shouldn't make $300 an hour. Okay, he has like a specialized labor role. He's he's analyzing assets. His intelligence and competence affects the future lives of other people. So you know what? Maybe he deserves $300 an hour. But I look at that and I say, well, how come this motherfucker is able to, do coke and have mistresses and all this crazy bullshit? Meanwhile, this motherfucker, can't afford rent, and it just doesn't feel intuitively fair.
Well, I don't know what fair and deserve mean in this context. Like there are
fair means that the Walmart stockbrokers don't fashion they don't sharpen the edges of soup cans in order to fucking chop the heads off of lawyers making $300 an hour. We can talk about principle or whatever, but ultimately, like, my justice, I suppose, is some degree of social stability that doesn't result in fascism or communism.
Because you made the mud pie analogy earlier, right? Like, if you choose to do work that is less valued, less productive, then you're going to be compensated less for that work. Now, there can be reasons why the market is in a bad place if there's like a labor surplus or blah, blah, blah. There's a million reasons why different jobs might not be compensated equally. But at the same time, the guy who like stands outside a store and flips the sign.
Yeah.
He's like flipping the sign, right? Okay. It's like, well, how Connor, my God, how come that guy doesn't get to, have live by himself and order DoorDash every night for dinner? Like, how come that job doesn't
cover that? That's not necessarily what I'm looking for.
Well, Connor, why isn't that fair? Well, I don't want him to sharpen his guillotine. Wouldn't it be fair?
Because DoorDash, we all know DoorDash is a wildly expensive, wildly ineffective.
Sure, but
consumer good.
What I'm getting at, Connor, is that you're building in this concept of deserved and fair, and I don't know what you mean by it, other than to say that some people think it. You're saying that, like, okay, yes, there are people who will get mad.
Well, a third of the Democratic Party thinks it right now.
Well, but what's funny about them is that they're not those people. Like, if you look at who the DSA voters are, they're actually almost universally college-educated, low-paid people. They're not actually.
I know they're underemployed.
Yeah, they're people who got bullshit degrees, right? They paid too, like. The average DSA voter, it's so fucking transparent.
I don't know if universally is accurate, but I think a large percentage of them are degree having underemployed folk. Yes.
Overwhelmingly, the story is something like this. Like, I went and I got a degree in like fucking, I don't know, gender studies or like the inequities of the West or like some fucking useless humanities Marxist coded degree. Then they got out in the workplace and they're like, I'm $200,000 in debt and I have my college degree. Can I be rewarded with a fantastic job now? And people are like, well, that sounds fucking useless. No, you can start at the bottom. And they're like, well, I have all this debt. And I used to be in college where it wasn't free, but I got to eat all this great food and I thought it was free because I was paying for it with my fucking loan that I didn't really keep track of. Now I've got this huge debt circling over me and my job prospects don't seem as good as I would like them to be. And I've been taught all about this Marcuse and Gramsci character and God, they seem smart. So I'm a vote for the DSA. And that seems overwhelmingly to be what their base is. Like El Said, I was looking at they had some stories about him. He didn't win any poor districts. It was like everything he was winning was like college towns. He was running up the score in college towns, and that's who was voting for him. So it's an oddity. Like I don't think that this is an intuitively appealing idea to people who are actually stocking the shelves at Walmart.
I don't know if I would have to take a look at the demographic stats. I do remember taking a look at an article that did say a substantial amount of DSA supporters or members, I think it was members specifically, members are oftentimes underemployed, highly educated folk. I would need to take a look at what you're saying, which is basically like, what is the base? What is the voting demographics?
It's young college grads.
This economic malaise, maybe I'm assuming that it's like so self-evident, but the reason why I'm assuming it's self-evident is because Number one, it lined up with my own like working class professional experience. Number two, I seem to hear it all the time, and I also I tend to hear it from working families. Uh, I'll try to be as brief as I can. Um, Basically, working enlisted military, then retail restaurant while putting myself through college, then law enforcement, then entry level corporate job, which did pay well, but I also had to earn every single fucking dollar that I made. It seemed like that a ton of people are stuck at the bottom, and the notion of the K economy is very common. Effectively, that in the 1990s, during a deregulatory bonanza, a lot of people were able to find and make substantial sums of money and therefore support their families and therefore do okay economically. Whereas now, people who are working, like the husband works 40 hours a week, wife works 20 to 30 hours a week, and they're trying to raise their kids, they're barely surviving. And that intuition seems very common. And I think it's part of the reason why extremist politics are so popular today.
But okay, to the extent,
like, I mean, how do you even explain the Trump phenomena without economic dissatisfaction of the working class of America?
Okay,
like 70% of his rhetoric is economic populist.
And if you're looking at that, what are the core components of economic problems? Let's say, right? It's not underemployment.
Well, I don't think it's DoorDash.
Well, but it's not underemployment. Like we certainly have unemployment's low. The key issues right now in terms of affordability are how much labor there is, right? Which is the immigration question primarily, but and then secondarily inflation. Like those are the two key drivers, right, of the various economic issues you're talking about.
Yeah, but with inflation, at least in my mind, I felt like inflation was relatively under control for a majority of my life, except for COVID and the Iran war. I was born in the late 80s. So basically, like the 2008 recession, at least from my memory, didn't have anything to do with inflation. It had to do with how much speculation there was within the housing market and then the collapse of the housing market.
Well,
and then COVID.
That's a more complicated story. But there were a number of policies put in place by the government to encourage banks to lend to people.
Yeah, to give out shitty loans
to people who couldn't really afford it for a variety of reasons, often around social justice.
A lot of people made money during the musical chairs that was that financial bubble.
I've just, any policy that you implement, there's going to be people in the financial and law sectors that make money off of it. That's just the nature of the beast. But what I'm saying is that a bubble was created as a result of speculation due to a government intervention. And then when that bubble burst, there was a recession, around that.
I know, but I almost right now with housing the way that it is right now, I almost feel like we should do it again, which I know is probably completely counterintuitive to your worldview, but effectively, like in my opinion, we have this. Jesus, unfortunately, I wish I had more stats on this. It feels like we have this economic malaise where, for instance, like I live in Central Florida. I was able to buy my childhood home from my parents, who in turn were able to buy it during the reasonable time of the 1990s. But because of the way that housing has become an investment vehicle for the working class and the middle class, a substantial amount of working class and middle class people are barred from the market. They just can't get the $20,000 to $50,000 down payment, the PMI, this, that, the other. They can't get the cash necessary in order to secure a home. But then that forces them into the rental market. Once it forces them into the rental market, they don't have the capacity to build equity. If they don't have the capacity to build equity, then they don't have the capacity to build intergenerational wealth.
Well, this is a bit of like the world has moved, right? Like as somebody who is a homeowner and also like a market investor, I'm glad to be a homeowner. I give stability to my family and it does build equity. But the market investments, if you count the improvements and the insurance and the damage, all the stuff I have to do to maintain the home, like a home is actually not a great intergenerational wealth vehicle. Like if you were investing in broad market ETFs,
this is something that I hear from Destiny, and I'm sorry to be fighting you on autistic economic policy, but I swear to God, I do not understand.
He's right about this.
I don't understand this statement at fucking all. I don't understand how pissing away $1,500 to $2,500 a fucking month, not building a penny of equity, versus taking out a 30-year mortgage at less than 5%. And then I do understand that there is a substantial amount of money that
if you could get it less than 5%, that would be better.
I got out before
you cannot get it.
COVID inflation hit.
Yeah,
sure. But let's say that we had a sane housing market and you were able to get a fucking mortgage for less than 5%. Well,
but you can't. Like no one can get that loan. Like it's, to be clear, it's 7%.
Well,
it was 3 in like
my parents with like 800 fucking credit scores and a substantial down payment were, but. Let's. I think a less than 5% fucking loan on a mortgage should be. Hold on, this is where I'm going to prove my progressive economic illiteracy, and you can go ahead and school me in the right wing ideas of whatever. But it's like, no, like the interest rate should correlate with like the money keeping its value and maybe profit built into the financial institution that's generating the loan. And that's it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason why the market or the fucking loans were 3% or 5% a decade ago was because it was effectively keeping pace with inflation and then a little bit of profit for the mortgage institution. Whereas now, because of the economic calamity of COVID, there's panic in the market, which is why the interest rate is so high, because they're worried that there's going to be another inflationary bubble that would make the mortgage not worth anything.
Well, the Fed keeps interest rates high as a counter-inflationary measure. Like it's not these are, because we have a federalized central system, they do control to a certain extent what the interest rate is through monetary policy. So it's not like if they wanted to lower the rates, they could. The problem is if they lowered the rates, they would fear it would either increase or fail to combat inflation. So they're keeping the rates lower. But my point is,
okay, explain this to me real quick.
Back up though to talk about the main point, and then we can get lost in the weeds if you want. The reason that people view houses as a good investment is that they're inflation proof. Whenever you have inflation, real estate rises with it. But the stock market is also inflation proof. The problem is that stock markets had barriers to entry, which were that you had to be rich to get a market or get a broker. That's no longer true. You can have a $0 fee account and trade on the market. And that stocks were very risky because you were buying an individual company, which could go up or down. But now we have broad ETFs, which mitigate that risk. So as a investment vehicle, I tend to agree with Destiny on this, in particular, because if you look at let's say, I'm just going to pick a number. Let's say you're putting $4,000 into your mortgage slash property taxes slash home insurance every month. Mm-hmm. And let's say if you're renting, it's going to be like $4,400 or whatever. It might be even less than that because the owners have built-in equity. The problem is in your first 5 or 6 10 years, you're only putting $200-$300 a month of principal in. It's almost all interest payments, and so you're not actually investing very much. Whereas if you didn't have to take on all the responsibilities of home ownership, you might actually be investing more than that, depending on the math. And a lot of that comes down to the interest rate. If you could buy a house at 3% interest, which a buddy of mine did in 2021, that would be very different than buying it at like 6 or 7% interest in terms of the value of it as a wealth building vehicle.
Okay, but this is my point. If you want to say the pot, this is kind of funny actually. If you had pots of cash that you could put shit into, then you are going to grow your pot of cash that is in the stock market faster than you're able to grow the pot of cash that is in your home. Then I understand. Like, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Which
But
by the way, is currently exactly my situation. When I have money, I look at my brokerage account, I look at my mortgage, and the rate of return on my brokerage account exceeds the interest rate on my mortgage. So as long as I think that that's likely to remain to be true, now there's a question there, but if I assume that's likely to remain to be true, and I'm being economically rational, I should prefer the higher rate of return. Now that said, I might be risk averse, and then I prefer to pay down my mortgage. But that's
right. But I want to point this out is that you have to live somewhere, right?
Sure.
And so when you're talking about people who have expendable income, their expendable income, you could work within a you could, live in an apartment and you could be getting charged $1,200 one year, and then you could be getting charged $2,000 the next year. But as long as you had your expendable income that you were putting into a sizable investment pot, and then you were making a shitload of cash off of it, you wouldn't necessarily care about that 40% increase in rent, which has happened to a substantial amount of people over the past decade, because you had this pot that was growing cash on the side. And I understand that. But even looking at the populations that have investment vehicles within the stock market, it's half of the United States population, 156 million, have stuff in the stock market, but 40% of the half of America that have shit invested in the stock market, it's exclusively retirement mutual funds through their employer.
Yep.
Right. So we're already talking about like 2/3 of the population not investing in that pot.
Sure.
Then there's like a level of economic literacy that you have to even have the confidence to invest in that pot. And then also, everyone needs to live somewhere. So if you have a binary choice between spending rent and never building equity, I understand what you said about the interest payments because I've seen my own interest payments, or having so just as an example, I had a $200,000 mortgage. Well, because of the inflationary protection nature of the homeowner's asset, my home is now speculated. Bear in mind, I think there's a little bit of bubble here, but it's speculated as an investment that's worth $700K. So in my opinion, when I fucking die, why would, and let's say that $700,000 in current dollars is protected by the inflationary measure, and I have the choice between renting and homeowning, how is me dying and then leaving $700K to my kids not the obvious choice over renting for the next 30 years?
Well, it's the obvious choice if you are assuming that you are so economically illiterate that even if you could rent and have equal or greater amounts of money to invest in the market as you would based on your whatever goes to principal, because a lot of it goes to interest, but like that sliver that goes to principal, which is what builds your equity. If you're saying that in no circumstance, if you're renting, would you ever invest a similar amount in the market, you would always spend it and just keep renting. Well, then you're comparing it to no equity vehicle, which of course it's better than no equity vehicle. But the point I'm making isn't that. The point I was making is that we're living in an age where for the first time, average Americans have access to market tools and they don't need to pay expensive advisors. They can put money into these investment vehicles with a very low barrier to entry. And that just like people figured out that the housing market is a good way to build generational wealth, people are going to need to figure out that this is a viable alternative, because in many cases, the math just works out better. Not all cases. If you live in like North Carolina or South Carolina, where the property values are relatively low and you can get the barrier to entry is low, housing might be the right way to build wealth. In fact, that's where people who do like real estate investing tend to buy, because the prices are low. But if you live in the Northeast, the prices have been baked in forever. They're hugely expensive. So the idea that you're going to use real estate in the Northeast to build generational wealth is, I think in many cases, someone like Destiny would be right. And you would be better off doing it through another method, which does build generational wealth through an alternative means. Now, I think a totally separate question is: are people economically literate or illiterate enough to figure this shit out? And that was literally
going to be my next comment.
But that's a fair question, but that's not at all what I was talking about, which is like what people should be doing rather than what they are doing.
Because basically, off of what I'm seeing, it looks like 20 to 25% of Americans are intelligent enough to take advantage of this. And then it does look like 25% of the population is under the age of 18. So I really wouldn't, be expecting them to be making broad investments in the American economy. So that literally leaves are you 2/3 of working Americans without this economic, maybe just because of ignorance, but also because a shitload of said
Connor,
Americans...
buying a house is really complicated. Like, if you're totally financially illiterate, you shouldn't be buying a house either. Because like I know some people who are totally financially illiterate and they bought a house and they got fucked. They got absolutely screwed on buying a house. Well,
why? Because they bought a fucking variable interest rate shit house at fucking 6% interest rate, and it's going up to 12.
They bought a variable interest rate that screwed them. They didn't get the correct inspections, or they bought it as is with no inspections. It has a ton of work that needs to be done. They're having problems with the permits. They're having problems with repairs. They're going deep out of pocket in order to like bring things up to code.
I guess I have classist hostility.
You can get absolutely fucked on buying a house.
No, I think this conversation, I just literally have like classist hostility, even though my family is the kind of people who are like smart enough to be invested in the stock market, and realistically I should be as well. But like, I think I just have like classist hostility to this notion, because every dipshit, even if I walked over to like the black neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. Like literally like the working class Joe Schmoes, they're mechanics, they're fucking, they're fucking, their generational poverty, every sob story that you've ever heard from a disenfranchised person of color. And I said, hey man, grandma fucking left you the house and you were able to split that equity or whatever, should you buy a house or should you rent? Like pretty much every economically illiterate motherfucker would say, whenever you have an opportunity to buy a house, you should buy a house. That way you can create generational wealth. And as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's like the history of the American white working class and middle class that almost all of our generational wealth is tied to property ownership.
But the thing that that I'm suggesting is new.
Yeah, you're being prescriptive, not descriptive.
Well, I get it. But also it just didn't exist. Like in previous generations, only the wealthy had access to the stock markets because you needed a broker and you needed to have an account with X dollars in it to get a broker. And like, so this is just a new thing, and ETFs are a new thing. Like, for example, it's so funny. He never gets any press for this. And it's one of my favorite things he's done. These Trump accounts that are coming out now, where when you have a kid who's born, the government creates an account and it automatically invests in the market in kind of like a time horizon based on the kid coming of age. So it's like you put some money in the account, it invests, it grows tax-free. They don't pay taxes till they take the money out. Now when they're 18, 21, 23, 24, that whatever it is, or longer, they have a nest egg for a down payment or something like this because the money's growing in the market. That's a fucking great idea, because the technology exists now. And I do think, you've raised these barriers to entry problems, but that's pretty easy. You open up, you fill out some online forms, the government makes an account for your kid, you deposit some money every month, or I might just be being economically thoughtless, and I'm truly gonna meditate, marinate on what you said, because what I'm kind of hearing, and I wonder if I should talk to my extremely economically literate parents about this, is I have a standard of living that I want to live that is given to me by the house that I currently live in. And I do have like a sentimental attachment to it for a variety of reasons. It's my parents' home. I was raised here for a substantial amount of time. My kids were raised here for a substantial amount of time. So I'm not saying that I'm going to do this. But it sounds like if I was a rawly unsentimental, economically literate person, I should effectively like sell this, pay off my mortgage,
take the money, the equity that I have left over, basically buy a cheap condo on, that's nearby in the right school system, et cetera, et cetera. That way, like you said, equity versus non-equity, you should still choose equity. But then buy a substantially cheaper condo and then take the excess cash generated by the equity of this property and then just put it into investment funds for, like, literally split it 3 ways, put it into aggressive investment funds for my kid, myself, and my other kid. And it sounds like you're saying that would be predictably more likely to generate more wealth than just sitting on this property and paying it off without any other investments.
It depends entirely on details I don't know. Like for example, like the value of your house, what it would sell for, the interest rate on your mortgage, like my friends who bought into the market when mortgages were low, oh, how about this? Let me tell you, I'll tell you.
Yeah, but like a condos, there are condos around here for like $200K. So like you could get a very inexpensive condo and have a majority of it paid off.
Yeah. And then another part of that's going to be in terms of short-term thinking, like, what's your time horizon? Like a lot of people are predicting that there's going to be a big market dip when the AI bubble pops, right? So if you're looking to have short-term money, investing in the market might lead to a downturn if the AI bubble pops, right?
Yeah. No, but I take this general advice from Ryan,
and then like fucking ruin your life. Yeah.
I invest in the AI bubble, it pops,
and then
I'm
fucking
ruined.
dies in the street. Yeah.
The next time I get to call into the Ryan Mulally show, I'm like, why, Ryan? Why did you give me this advice?
But here's like here's the flip side of that. If your time horizon is super long, bubble bursts are actually a good thing. Like the most valuable dollar for dollar money I ever spent in my life was the money I put into a retirement account when I was a teacher, like a 401k, 403b sort of thing, because I put the money in as the stock market was plummeting during 07, 08. I wasn't really paying attention to this. I was just teaching, but like I was going into my retirement account and getting invested. So it bought in when the market was super low. And because it's a retirement account, I never looked at it again. I just get statements and I stopped contributing to it because I stopped being a teacher. But the dollars I put in 07, 08 are omega valuable because I bought the low market and now it's the high market, right? So like the bust is good for you if you're buying when it's low in the long term. But if you have a short time horizon, then you wouldn't want to do that. Wait
till the AI bubble bursts. Got it.
Or if you're like if you want to be a speculator, Connor, wait till the AI bubble bursts and when everybody else is selling, start buying. Mm-hmm. You're like, that like, that's the move is to like, okay, like I've got some dollars I'm not afraid to lose. I'm a buy on the way down.
So hold up. So, okay, let's move away from specific home economics because I think I have a broader sociological point.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to ruin your life with economics advice on stream.
No. But the reason why the home economics is so important, even though we spent like 10 or 20 minutes on it or whatever, which might have been like a silly segue for people who are watching, is because it is the home, in my opinion, it's the home economics that's motivating the economic resentment that's fueling radicalism within our country. So basically, regardless of whether or not you're a Trump economic populist who wants to seal the border and tariff our, get a more just tariff regime and blah, blah, fucking blah, or if you're like a Bernie Sanders social democrat or democratic socialist, whatever's motivating you to these more extreme political factions is typically like economic resentment and insecurity, in my opinion. So the point of that being, though, it sounds like you are rejecting the solutions of the left because the solutions of the left are like not to cut the social welfare programs, but to reinforce them, effectively add on top of whatever social welfare systems we currently have, universal health care. And then once we have universal health care, move on to the next social guarantee. Whereas it sounds like to you, it sounds like, hey, as a part of public education, we need to educate people on stock market investment, and then they need to do substantially better economically as individual players within the American game, and that will alleviate the economic insecurity that Americans are experiencing.
It'll do more. You know, I mean, you'll never alleviate it completely, but it'll do more. I think the problem that we're seeing is, and we're seeing this globally now. Remember when people used to say, "Oh, America's healthcare system is so terrible. We should have Canada's healthcare system." They kind of stopped saying that because Canada's healthcare system is kind of coming apart right now, and the reason it's coming apart is that.
But is that because people actually resent universal access to low cost healthcare, even if it takes a long time and your cancer probably gets worse while you're waiting for a cancer consultation, or is it because we have the memes of euthanizing fucking poor and disabled people? What is the actual hostility to Canadian?
The actual hostility is that it's the quality of service and time to get a doctor is going way down, because who the fuck wants to be a doctor in a system where you can't make any money being a doctor and you're going to be dealing with constant government regulation and intervention every step along the way?
Well, primarily Indians and Pakistanis, going to be real. It's primarily third worlders who want to be.
They want to be doctors here because they can make money here. But in Canada, if you have
but I'm just saying,
you have universal health care,
with limited immigration access across the planet, that I think it's a stereotype in both the United Kingdom and in Canada that a disproportionate amount of their healthcare workers are from East Asia or Southeast.
And you're going to create a system where, like, if you artificially cap what the doctors are making because universal healthcare is going to have that effect one way or the other, then you're going to need cheap immigrant laborers to be doctors because they're the ones who are going to be happy about the wage that doctors are getting, as opposed, right. And this is kind of a classic, I was having a conversation with someone about this recently where I was like, well, Social Security, the math just doesn't work. And they're like, yeah, well, that's why we need to import more immigrants to make the math work. And I was like, well, this is the classic leftist move where we created a system, the system breaks, and then we need to create like the next horrifying leftist intervention to fix the system that we just created and broke. The problem.
Sorry. In reference to immigration, like, I don't buy into the left wing, like, basically because the French gave us a statue 200 years ago, we have to be open borders. We don't have to be open borders. No. Well, but I do want, like, sane immigration. And I guess my question to you is, like, do you view immigration as like a blight or a boon? Because I mean, I thought the common consensus was effectively it's on the whole over time a boon.
It's neither. Immigration is a policy tool which should be used to advance the interests of American citizens. Like you should have more of it when it's helpful and less of it when it's not helpful, right? Like it's not any one thing. It's like any other policy tool. I think right now we're in a corrective cycle because we've had too much of it for the wrong reasons. One of the things that I saw, it got tied up in court again, which is a shame. But like one of Trump's policies was that for certain like H-1B visas, the fee that the company paid to get the visa was $5,000, but they could get somebody from another country who would work for, like, the delta was more than $5,000. So they'd get someone at a very low wage and they'd actually save money. Right. Mm-hmm. So Trump tried to increase the fee for the visa from $5,000 to $100,000. The idea being, well, you're not saving money on labor now. Right? Like if you're using it, it's because you really can't find someone in America to do the work. But if you have to pay $100,000 on top of their salary, you're not saving money hiring this person.
Right.
And that got struck down in court and I've been following it since then. But like, that's the sort of thing where I think people intuitively understand that there's a problem, like that people are bringing in labor because it's cheaper. And that we don't have to do that. That's a choice. We're choosing for that to be a policy that we're putting into place, and it's having effects that both culturally and economically that people don't love, and they would rather have there be less labor and higher wages, lower housing costs, this sort of thing, which have, I think, been a problem. And then culturally, there's problems.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is effectively the liberal, especially like the apologia for left wing immigrant policy, I suppose, is that and sorry if I butcher this, but effectively that, like, let's say that you have a low wage immigrant who comes in, right? You have a Mexican immigrant who comes in, and he has four, and he's an agricultural worker, and he has four people who come in with him in order to do the agricultural work. So American citizens are benefiting because those people are probably making minimum wage or less than minimum wage. So your produce is cheap. But then also you're getting the benefits of them being within the community, at least from an economic standpoint. So those four people are going to rent an apartment. The renter of the apartment is going to be making money. They're going to be buying, sodas and coffee and food in the local economy. So the local businesses are going to be raking in revenue, profit, and tax dollars. And then not just that, but if they have a kid, let's say that they actually find a little farmer's daughter that's sweet on them, and then they have a kid, then not only do you have a new taxpayer, but effectively, like, you have basically that kid is going to go into the school system, and then the school system is going to raise them, and then that person in turn is going to become an economically productive person within the United States of America. Now, of course, that comes with some rapes and some murders, and some drug activity, which isn't great. But the argument is effectively, like, on the whole, there's a lot more people who are contributing to the local economy and contributing to the local tax base over the rapists and the murderers and the drug trafficking. So how do you feel about that narrative?
I think it's oversimplified because there are countervailing forces as well. Like, for example, if you're somebody in your earlier example who stocks the shelves at a Walmart, that's the sort of job that is very sensitive to oversupply of labor, and your wages are going to be decreased by having a lot of cheap, unskilled labor in the market who are willing to work at lower rates. So if you're the Walmart stalker, you might have a problem with flooding the zone with cheap labor because it might decrease your wages. There's also, now these aren't final, but there was I think HUD put out a study that said in urban areas, about 20% of the increase in housing costs in urban zones was due to immigration during the Biden administration. So, that figure will get vetted over time. I think this was an initial draft, so I don't want to bet the house on it. But the reason it's intuitively interesting is that, if you're not building more housing and you have more people, then you're going to have increased housing costs because you have the same supply and more demand, right? So housing costs might go up. That's part of the reason why I wanted another fucking.
That's why I wanted another. I forget the law that enshrined the housing rush. I forget what it was called. I think it was Bernie something. There was Madoff, or wasn't Madoff like a Ponzi scheme guy?
Madoff was a Ponzi scheme guy.
Yeah, there was some guy. I think his name was Bernie. He used to be like a lefty. His nipples were protruding through his shirt, and Donald Trump tweeted about his nipples. But that guy. He was a part of a co-sponsor for legislation that was effectively meant to alleviate housing discrimination against, like, poor folk and black folk or whatever, which caused arguably the federal government to back mortgages in such a way that the entire market was like, let's build shit as quickly as we can. And so that caused the housing boom of the 90s and thousands, which eventually led to the bust. Now, here's my thing that's kind of like interesting. So I think that with that 20% increase in, let's just take it on face value, 20% increase in price due to overwhelming demand for housing. And then a lot of housing has shifted to the rental market because most people can't afford a mortgage right now. So my instinct is like, well, fuck it. People need houses now. They need these vehicles for wealth now. Let's start another subsidization, federal subsidization in order to start a run on new construction. And we'll just run a fucking bubble for a decade and then it'll implode again. But at least we'll have a shitload of new housing.
Well, we just did pass a housing bill.
Well, good.
Which is designed to incentivize new construction. I don't know how effective it's going to be, but they did just pass a law.
Good. But what's interesting about this is demography, right? So since if you look at the demographic numbers, I think the only thing that is keeping us with a positive birth rate is immigrants. I think it's truly the only thing keeping us with a positive birth rate or close to a positive birth rate within the United States, whereas places like Korea are, you know, they're basically expecting a 30% disappearance of their population in the next like generation or two. And so if we froze immigration the way that Trump wanted to, we would go into a negative demographic replacement rate. And then within a generation, 30% of the population might disappear. And then I expect housing to be substantially cheaper because literally people will be living in fucking ghost towns.
Well, but the weird thing about that,
maybe that's a solution.
The weird thing about that,
maybe the degrowthers are right,
is that the birth rate issues are so tightly tied to ideological issues. Right, like you don't see like the birth rates aren't like below replacement for like devoutly religious communities. Like it's specifically, I'm not using liberalism as like in the sense I normally use it. If you talk about like the modern egalitarian progressive ideology in its like broadest sense, that is very tied to a declining birth rate. But like, you know, in many senses, you know, like, I'm not, by the way, I'm a deist, not a Christian, but like, you know, I do believe that most people have neither the time, inclination, nor aptitude to build a functioning moral system from scratch that governs them, their lives, and their communities. The overwhelming majority of people need to rely on traditions and wisdom that's been passed down to them, and be fruitful and multiply turns out to be better advice than the opposite. So, you know, we have a bit of a problem here, but it's one of those odd things where it's like, you know, on one hand, you're like, man, our ideas are so bad that we're as a group going extinct. You know what we should do? We should invite in the third world. It's like, well, you could also just like work on those ideas, right? Like we could try to do something about, no. The ideas are good. We're going to keep the ideas. We're just going to go extinct. That's the plan.
One of the things that I do find ironic, and I think Jen Winkler did it literally the other day, they brought up like, well, if we set up these extreme social welfare blankets similar to Scandinavia, then we would improve the birth rate. But then you look at Scandinavia and they have the same or arguably worse birth rates than us. And so it's quite clear that the social welfare systems actually don't have much to do with whether or not people choose to have children. And then not just that, it seems like the inverse is almost true. It seems like people who are threatened, who are economically insecure, who are in dangerous situations, they are more likely to have children and raise said children than the people that are materially, financially, socially, politically, militarily secure. And it's kind of wild how our instinct is to increase security, but it actually correlates with a decrease in fertility.
Yeah, well, it does have that weird correlation. And then also, I think that there's a need for some kind of like counter propaganda, right? Like, you know, my whole life, and especially in my professional circles, because I work in law, almost every woman I know, and these are very smart, capable career women who've done very well. Like if you're working in areas where I've been working, you've done very well for yourself. So I'm not knocking any decisions that they've made, but these are women who prioritize their career to an extraordinary degree. And most of them have kids very, very late if they choose to have kids, right? And under those circumstances, you're going to have a low birth rate every time. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not I have a strong libertarian streak. I don't like the government telling people what they can and cannot do. But I think that some of this is a cultural thing. And that's the proper way to fix some of these issues, where it's like, what happened to like the glorification of like the importance of running a
family
home and having a family and raising kids? You know, like there's for my whole life, there was this like big cultural pressure on women to do the opposite, to delay having families, to or not do it, to prioritize having a career. And that is just a cultural pressure, and that can be changed. Like there could be different cultural pressure.
What was the show with Tim the Toolman Taylor?
Oh, Home Improvement. Home
Improvement. Dude, Home Improvement is like the last, except for Modern Family, which weirdly enough, Modern Family has like a lot of progressive and liberal signals in it as well. But Modern Family and Home Improvement are the last two shows that I can think of that actually show like the challenges of family in a wholesome way where the dynamics are comedic and the challenges are to be overcome, and of course in a Modern Family, the main dad is depicted as a fucking buffoon. But at least Tim the Toolman Taylor in Home Improvement was depicted as a beloved buffoon, a wildly successful beloved buffoon. So I don't know, man. I think there's something to that where there is like an extreme anti-natalist, hedonistic, nihilistic cynicism in our culture. And if you point it out too, if you're just like, hey, in pop culture, we used to have like pro-family messaging, and that has all but evaporated over the past 30 years. They'll bring up like 2 TV shows in a sea of anti-natalist propaganda.
And by the way, the same people who are putting out that propaganda are the same cohort that we were talking about in the educational setting, right? Like
we're educated and underemployed.
Well, no, like remember we were talking about like this kind of like this group that has this like Rawlsian blank slate vision, where they're like, wouldn't society be better if men and women occupied the exact same roles in society by and large? Because it's a blank slate and humans don't have a nature. But then it's like, well, it turns out that if you push that, then we stop having babies and we go extinct. So maybe like that might not be the case. And I think the Scandinavian countries bear this out because they have maximum egalitarianism, but they have not resulted in flattening of sex differences. It's resulted in the magnification of sex differences, as Jordan Peterson so famously pointed out. It could be that on average, men and women, but shocking, are fairly different and will do different things if left to their own devices. And that might be a good thing. And it might be the case that we've gone a bit too far in some of these cultural pushes towards blank slatism and egalitarianism, and that we can fix some of what ails with us by simply focusing on like tradition and human nature and doing the things that actually have an established track record of working, as opposed to these kind of like wild cultural experiments which we've been engaging in recently.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the next step conversationally for you and me, is basically going to be because what it sounds like to me, and maybe it's because I've been in the Twitch and YouTube lefty debate sphere for so long, that I've only accepted, and weirdly enough, I think this is something that Sargon of Akkad pointed out, I've either accepted left-wing social and political prescription, or I've criticized and said why it's stupid. But I've never really creatively thought outside of the box of like, what kind of society could we actually create that doesn't accept this rawly materialist egalitarian justice frame of living, and actually prioritizes like other principles of a good human life that don't fall in this like alleviation of material burden, and then like raw, like I guess liberty is the best way to say it. Like you cannot criticize what people do with their liberty, but you should alleviate their material suffering and then leave them up to their own devices after that. And that really is, like, in my opinion, like the lefty prescription. And then not only that, they just really disagree on the level of material deprivation or alleviation of suffering that they should do. But besides that, they agree on the purpose.
Yeah, they want to have not only do they want to have egalitarianism in the government, where the government cannot discriminate, though of course they actually mean the government will discriminate in the ways that they prefer. That's actually what they mean. But then they want to say that culturally you aren't allowed to personally discriminate between things that work and things that don't work. Like you're a bad person if you notice a behavior and you're like, well, fuck it, I don't really want to participate in that. Like, like in New York City.
Or if you bother to criticize it.
Yeah, well, like in New York City, you're not allowed to not hire someone because they smell like weed during a job interview. Like that's a discriminatory
reason.
That's a
rule? That's a law?
New York City is very dumb human rights law. but here's how that plays out in practice. If someone shows up smelling like, anyway, like you can imagine how that plays out. People show up smelling like weed. They don't get hired, but not for that reason, right? Like there's
Sure.
like there's a pretext created, but it's
but the instinct to even enshrine that into law out of
idiotic.
some sense
It's
of egalitarian alleviation of the discrimination against the marijuana consumer. That's fucking silly as
shit. Like, here's what I'm looking forward to, Connor, and maybe I'll leave it at this because we always ramble in these conversations, which is part of their charm. You did this DGG thing. You had this falling out with Destiny, which obviously doesn't affect my view of you because Destiny fucking hates me. So there's no, I'm kind of removed from all this sort of thing. And we've had disagreements about primarily what to do about Trump and Trumpism. But also that's running its course. So it's I'm interested in what happens next for you because you've exited the DGG sphere at the moment when Trump is going to start being a setting sun of American politics. And I'm curious what happens next for you because you've been doing the anti-Trump thing for a long time now. And there's going to be like a new alignment of politics in the future. And you're a free agent all of a sudden. So this seems like an interesting moment.
It is. And I think that's where my audience and I are at a crossroads, so to speak. Obviously, I want to retain my Lockheed liberals. I still like my grill hottest project of basically trying to get the sane people from the center left and center right to work together. However, I don't know if it's going to survive the rebirth of the right, where effectively, and I do think that there's two paths that are ahead of us. Of course, more paths could emanate over time. But there's going to be like the techno-feudalist Trumpian successor in Vance. And then there's going to be, I strongly recommend Rubio's Munich speech, but Rubio seemed to try to be synthesizing like old school neoconservative talking points with MAGA America First sentiment, but then also he's extremely technocratic and wildly pragmatic. So there's a part of me that would love to see a synthesis of the economic angst that motivates MAGA through a technocratic Republican who has to pay some lip service to MAGA in the Trump movement, but he's not captured by it. And that's like a new right wing that I would be extremely interested in. Although obviously like 70% of my audience would still be hostile to that movement because they would view it as a mask on continuation of the Trump movement.
Of course. Well, whatever happens next, it's going to be labeled as worse than Trump somehow. So of course that's going to happen.
Right. But see, and that's where I'll be excited to throw elbows because if they're like, Rubio cut taxes for capital gain, like if he does something like that and they're like, this is worse than Trump, then I'm gonna be like, hold on guys, hold on. Like let's pump the brakes here. Like,
well, I think
let's remember where we came from.
What I'm hopeful is that the right, maybe more gracefully than Trump has done it, but that the right continues to chip away at some of these progressive overreaches rather than taking the over-Burkean approach, meaning that just because it is the status quo means that it must be accepted, right? Where the right is only a break and never a direction. Like, I think that's a mistake. And to the extent that one of the ways that I've kind of like thought about the Trump era is that people desperately wanted that. They wanted not just a break, but an actual directional shift. And he represented that, though he has all his other quirks and problems that come with that territory. And if that spirit is maintained by someone like it could be Vance, but I think more likely a Rubio or a DeSantis character who's a bit more of a pragmatic operator and a bit more able to, do the work. If they can get elected, they are less charming. That would be very, very interesting, but that's not a given. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I need to see what the vision is of the quote unquote new direction. And I'll end with this just because you said you 10 to noon, and I like to keep these things around 2 hours so they're listenable as like a consumable single content piece. But with Trump, I think that so much of his narration was palingenetic, and I'm not trying to say that to undercut him as like a fascist or whatever specifically. I'm just saying it was, we used to be great. We used to have all these things awesome. You know, if you want to visualize the 1990s or 1980s as when we were great, cool. If you want to visualize the 1950s or 1960s as when we were great, cool. But we need to get back to that. And so that feels like a, instead of a break, that feels like a yanking back further than the break would quote unquote allow, so to speak. Whereas if you were talking, but he did promise a quote unquote new direction. So yeah, I would be extremely interested in a technocratic right-wing vision of the future of America. Because if it's just tax cuts, I'm going to be pissed.
No, I think it can't just be tax cuts. And I think there has to be like a willingness to actually revisit some things that have not aged well. Like, I mean, one of the things that I just did a stream on, Jake the lawyer put out a video and I reacted to it because it's interesting. Like the 17th Amendment that took away the state's ability to put senators directly in the Senate, that sucks. That sucks real bad, because if only it means that like the people who are in the Senate are not beholden to their states and are in fact creatures of the federal government, and that there is no, the state itself is not represented in the federal government to say like, no, we actually don't want to have strings put on our state power, like our liberty through federal spending in this way. Like the states are poorly represented as power bases.
Ooh,
and
because it's democratic and it's like a national, well, I mean, it's not national, it's local, but at the same time, they become creatures of DC. Whereas if they were appointed by the state legislature or the state governor, then they might be advocates for the state.
Yeah, well, like let's say there's a law that says something like, we're going to give the states money, but it puts all these strings on them, right? And it's going to like, it'd be very contrary to states' rights or states' policy, but it's like a political win for you as the senator nationally, because you're elected directly by the people. The state is not represented. The state has a different interest than the senator does, which is not great from a like federalist perspective. Like, you know, there are problems that are inherent with these some of these progressive fixes. I think have aged badly and could do with some reexamination. Birthright citizenship is another one that like the case was lost, but that like it's aged badly. It's a bad policy. Like, does that mean that you can just change?
You're just here to piss off the chat right before we leave, huh?
Yeah. Okay, I'll ask you this, chat. If it's such a great policy that we inherited from England, how come England no longer does it? If it's such a great policy, how come the country that we ostensibly inherited it from doesn't do it anymore? Because they changed it because it doesn't work in the modern era. So whether, you know, whatever your view of it is constitutionally, it's a bad policy, and there should be some groundswell around changing these things in the future, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, man.
Well,
good
cool.
talking
Well,
to you.
let's put a little bow on it. You want to shout anything out before we wrap?
Yeah, I'm going to be. I did this members only on my side, which was a disaster tech wise. I'm not sure I'll do that again. But tonight I'm going to be talking to Wick about how I saw this whole DSA thing coming, and that I Godspeed. I hope he wins, but I think he's going to lose. So if you want to see me and Wick,
if it gets spicy, what I'm hoping is that you jump in order to say I told you so. And then either some fucking DSA simps are like, let me on. You know, like Pisco's like, let me on. I'm going to fight Ryan. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And then if it gets spicy, I'll probably cover that early next week.
Yeah, look,
so.
I you know, as much as me and Wick have a, you know, good relationship and a long backstory, when I go a Wick show, I expect to be ambushed by at least one call-in at this point. That's just kind of...
Let's go.
Like, the odds of Destiny calling in to yell at me are like 50-50 these days. So, you know, it is what it is.
Base. Let's go. All right, King. Well,
talk soon.
It was cool catching up, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Man. See you later.
Bye.